They said a man could buy anything in the frontier territories if he had enough coin, but even Caleb Dunn knew there were lines a decent soul wasn't meant to cross. Yet there, he stood, dust on his boots, tension in his jaw, while an auctioneer's voice echoed across the packed yard like a preacher gone cruel. $2. The rancher offers $2 for the girl. Do I hear $3? The girl didn't flinch. She stood barefoot on the wooden platform, wrists tied with rawhide, chin lifted as if she were carved from something older than the plains themselves. Her face was streaked with dirt and pride in equal measure. Her long black hair, tangled from struggle, caught the late afternoon wind like a banner of defiance. "You will regret this," she said, her voice low and steady in a way that made even the rowdiest ranch hands shift uneasily. "I won't obey a man who buys people." The crowd jeered at her bravery, but Caleb saw something else in her eyes, something fierce, wounded, and unbroken. The auctioneer slapped the post with his stick. "Quiet down, girl. You'll fetch your new home soon enough." But the girl wasn't talking to him. Her gaze was fixed solely on Caleb, as if she could burn her warning straight into his bones. That was the hookshot. Sudden, impossible to ignore, and then the dust swirled. The shouts dimmed, and the memory twisted backward to the moment that set all of this in motion. It had been an ordinary morning on the outskirts of Red Butte, sun rising behind the butte, cattle grazing in their lazy lines, the smell of fresh coffee on the pot. Caleb lived quiet, alone on a ranch too big for one man's hands, but too empty to feel like a home. He hadn't always been that way. Once, he'd been a man with a future engaged to a girl from town, certain the railroads and new opportunities could turn everything better, but dreams had a way of running quicker than a man's reach, and when Emily left him for a wealthier rancher with more land and fewer worries, well, some wounds didn't bleed on the outside. Caleb had taken to keeping his words few, his regrets silent, and his heart locked in a place no one could pry open. Then came the news. A group of captives, Lakota and Cheyenne, mostly women and children, were being sold off. After a skirmish near the Powder River, local lawmen claimed it was legal under military seizure. The townsfolk didn't ask too many questions. They just came to buy cheap labor. Caleb hadn't meant to go, but something about the notice nailed to the saloon door had pulled him there anyway. Maybe curiosity, maybe guilt, maybe a quiet desire to do one thing, just one that didn't leave a scar on his conscience. That was how he found himself staring at the girl on the platform. She was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 17, maybe 18, but there was nothing young about her stare. It was the stare of someone who'd seen the world's cruelty and decided she wouldn't bend for it. The bidding was low, the tone ugly. $1.50, $1.60. Boy, she ain't worth near $2, Caleb had said without thinking, his voice steady but his jaw tight. Heads turned toward him with surprise. Caleb Dunn rarely spoke in town unless he had to, and buying a native girl was something nobody expected. The auctioneer smacked the post again. $2. Going once. That was when she spoke. "You will regret this," she said again, louder now, her chin angled like a warrior. "I won't obey you. I won't obey anyone." Her words weren't a threat. They were a promise. A few men laughed, but Caleb didn't. Something about her defiance stirred an old ache in him, a memory of someone else who once stood proud, who once told him she'd never bow to another man's wealth. Right before she left him, for exactly that, the auctioneer raised his hand. Twice. Caleb stood still, caught halfway between moral duty and the cold realization that he might be making a mistake that had changed everything. The girl's eyes locked on him. Wind swept her hair across her face, but she didn't blink thrice. Sold for $2. The crowd erupted in noise, deals being made, coins being counted, dust rising in the heat, but Caleb felt none of it. He just watched the girl, her pride, her anger, her silent fire, and felt the first tremor of a choice he couldn't undo, no matter how the story ended, because sometimes in the West, a man didn't choose the moment that shaped him. Sometimes the moment chose him, and this one had just begun. Caleb hadn't expected the silence. Not from the girl he knew, she carried storms behind her eyes, but from the town. Folks watched him lead her off the platform like he was dragging dynamite with a frayed fuse. Some whispered, some spat, some shook their heads with pity or judgment he couldn't untangle. A few men snickered as he passed. Hope you like trouble, Dunn. That one's got teeth, you'll see. She bolt by sundown. Shoulda bought a mule, cheaper and less likely to stab you. Caleb kept walking. The girl kept pace steps light, shoulders square, her wrists still tied, though she held them like bindings couldn't touch her spirit. At his wagon he paused, reaching for his knife to cut her restraints. She jerked back. "Don't touch me." The blade froze mid-air. Her voice wasn't fearful, it was firm, shaped by a lifetime of being taught who to trust and who to fight. Caleb slowly set the knife on the wagon board and stepped back. "You're free to ride without ropes," he said quietly, "but you'll fall behind on foot. I'd rather bleed than sit beside you." He didn't answer. He simply turned and climbed onto the wagon seat. For a moment he thought she might run down the street, disappear between the stables and the mercantile, but she didn't. She lifted her chin, exhaled once, and climbed up beside him, as if refusing to show weakness even in the small act of choosing the easier path. They rolled out of town, wheels crunching over the dry earth. Only when Red Butte faded behind them did she speak again. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. She looked at him like he'd told the dumbest lie she'd ever heard. "Men don't buy what they don't want." "I bought your freedom," he said. Her eyes narrowed with anger, not rage, but insult. "Freedom doesn't come with a price." Caleb didn't argue, because maybe she was right. They rode until the plains widened before them, grass brushed gold by the lowering sun. The distant shadows of pronghorn moving like spirits across the earth. The wind carried the scent of sage and nearing nightfall. If the world had a voice, it was whispering that trouble followed close behind. Halfway home. Caleb pulled into a clearing near a shallow stream. His horse needed water. The girl looked like she hadn't eaten in days. He stopped the wagon and stepped down. "You can stretch your legs," he said. Again, she didn't move at first, but her gaze flicked to the water, to the trees, to the open sky, measuring escape routes, judging distance, terrain, and danger. Caleb pretended not to see it. Finally she slid off the wagon, landing softly, like the earth had been waiting for her feet. He handed her a piece of bread and dried meat from the wagon box. She hesitated, suspicion carved into her expression, but her hunger betrayed her. She took them with stiff fingers and walked toward the water, keeping space between them like a wall. Caleb rubbed his horse's neck, giving her room. She ate slowly, still watching him between bites. After a long stretch of quiet, he said, "There'll be folks in town angry I didn't leave you there." Her jaw tightened. "And they'll be angrier when they find out what you did." He glanced over. "What I did?" "You interfered. That makes you a target. My people, your people. Neither side trusts a man who tries to stand between them." She wasn't wrong. The West didn't reward mercy. It punished it. But Caleb had lived with enough regrets. He didn't need more. Before he could speak, the sound of hooves echoed faintly across the plains. A single rider, moving slow, cautious, then another, and another, too spaced to be a group, too deliberate to be accidental. Caleb's horse stiffened. The girl straightened, senses sharpening. "You expecting company?" she asked. "No." Her voice went even quieter. "Then, trouble's coming." They climbed back into the wagon. Caleb turned the team toward home, urging them faster as night shadows lengthened. But the riders kept a measured distance behind, ever close, never far, like ghosts tracking the living. By the time they reached the edge of Caleb's ranch, the riders had disappeared, or hidden where the grass grew tall. The girl said nothing, but her shoulders rose and fell with steady breaths, a warrior preparing for the storm. Caleb knew it too. Helping her wasn't just a personal risk, it was a political one, a social one. The kind neighbors whispered about, and sheriffs kindly warned a man to undo, and the consequences had already begun to arrive on horseback. He looked at her as the sky darkened. "You don't have to stay," he said. She stared straight ahead. "I won't obey you," she said softly. "But I'm not running. Not yet. Not yet." It was the closest thing to trust she could give. And the night was about to test whether either of them deserved it. The first sign wasn't the hoofbeats, it wasn't the flicker of torchlight on the distant ridge, it was the way the girl, still silent beside the window of Caleb Dunn's small ranch house, lifted her head like she'd heard a sound carried only for her. She didn't speak, didn't move, didn't breathe for several long seconds. Then her voice came low. They're coming. Caleb felt his stomach turn to dust. He stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under his weight, and scanned the darkening plains. Nothing at first, just the sweep of tall grass whispering under the wind and the slow bleed of twilight across the horizon. Then a second shape appeared, then a third, then 10 more, not charging, not hiding, just standing, a line of riders forming a silent wall in the distance, silhouetted against the last sliver of day. The girl joined him on the porch, barefoot, arms folded tightly across her chest. She didn't look afraid, only tired, like she had known this moment would come the second Caleb cut her bindings. Who are they? Caleb asked quietly. My people, she said, or what's left of them. He tried to read her expression, but her face was carved from something unreadable, grief, pride, warning, all braided into a single unbroken stare. A single drumbeat echoed faintly across the plains, slow and deep, like the earth itself was speaking. Caleb felt the sound crawl up the porch and into his ribs. They're not here for war, she said. He looked at her. How do you know? Because war drums don't speak that slow. That's a call for judgment. She stepped down from the porch, her hair whipping round her face in the rising wind. Caleb grabbed her arm without thinking. Stop. You walk out there, you might not come back. She pulled free, not violently, but firmly. And if I don't, that's the world we live in. The quiet burned between them. Behind them, the horses in Caleb's corral stirred nervously. A lantern hanging near the barn swayed in the wind. The sky had turned a deep bruised violet, the kind that made a man wonder if God held his breath in moments like these. Far across the field, a rider dismounted, another joined him, then a third. They began walking toward the ranch, closing the distance with slow, measured steps. Their heads were high, their pace deliberate, a procession, not a threat. Caleb reached for his rifle inside the doorway. The girl shook her head once. If you lift that, even for comfort, we all die. He hesitated, then let his hand fall away. She walked out from the porch and stood a few paces ahead of him, close enough he could run to her if something went wrong, far enough to show she wasn't hiding behind him. The three men approached, older warriors, faces lined with wind and loss, feathers in their hair, dust on their boots, weapons sheathed but visible. Caleb didn't understand a word of the language spoken next, but he understood the weight behind every syllable. The men weren't shouting, they weren't accusing, their tone was calm, deep, steady, like judges delivering a sentence long prepared. The girl answered softly, her voice steady but trembling beneath the surface. It was a strange thing. He had seen her stand defiant before a crowd of settlers, unbending and fierce, but facing these men she seemed smaller, younger, more exposed. Not afraid of death, afraid of disappointing ghosts she still carried. One of the warriors glanced at Caleb. His eyes were sharp and quiet, reading every inch of the man who dared pull a native girl from an auction block. The girl stepped closer to them and placed her hand over her heart, a plea or a confession. Caleb wished he could understand. Another drumbeat rolled across the plains, closer now, heavier, echoing through the night like the crack of distant thunder. The oldest warrior spoke again, his voice rising like a slow tide. The girl stiffened. Caleb felt the instinct to move toward her, but she lifted a hand behind her without turning, a warning for him to stay still. Then she spoke, louder this time, and the words broke something in her voice. The warriors stepped back, not in fear, in disappointment. They looked at her, then at the ranch, then at Caleb. And Caleb knew he wasn't the danger in their eyes. He was the complication, the mistake, the man who had interfered with something he didn't understand. A single sentence from the elder, carried across the wind-soft final, carved in frost. The girl's shoulders sagged. What did he say? Caleb whispered when she finally turned back toward the house. She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, not crying, just brushing away something she refused to name. They're giving me one night, she murmured. One night for what? She looked at him with a stillness that made his chest tighten. One night to decide whether I return with them. or die here. Asterisk the riders turned and began walking back to their horses, disappearing into the dark as silently as they had arrived. Asterisk and the wind over the plains felt colder than winter. The night settled over the ranch like a heavy wool blanket, thick, smothering, restless. Coyotes called in the distant ravines, horses paced in their pens, and the lantern inside Caleb's small house flickered with every uncertain gust that slipped through the cracks. Asterisk the girl sat at his table, hands clasped together, staring at nothing. Asterisk Caleb stood by the stove, his coffee forgotten, watching her with the uneasy helplessness of a man trying to fix something he didn't understand. Asterisk, they said one night. He finally murmured, but they didn't say why. Asterisk, she didn't look up. It's not for them, it's for me. He waited. My people, they don't take back someone who's been sold, she said. Not without proof the person is still of the same spirit, that they still belong. Asterisk, Caleb absorbed that quietly. And what do you have to prove? Asterisk, that I wasn't saved for the wrong reasons. Her voice cracked, just a little, enough to show the truth hiding beneath her iron posture. Asterisk, she lifted her chin, staring at the lantern light. If I return, they might accept me. If I stay, they'll assume the worst. Asterisk, Caleb set the coffee pot aside and crossed the room to sit across from her. She didn't pull away, she just watched him with guarded eyes, the way a wolf watches a stranger from the edge of a tree line. I didn't buy you to own you, he said. I know. Asterisk, you don't believe that. Asterisk, she closed her eyes. For the first time since he'd met her, she looked tired, tired of running, tired of fighting, tired of carrying the burden of being born between worlds that hated each other far more than they should. Asterisk, she opened her eyes again. Why did you do it? The question hung in the dim space like a trap. Caleb exhaled slowly. Asterisk, I saw someone who shouldn't have been there. Asterisk, someone like me. Asterisk, no. His voice softened. Someone like who I used to be. She frowned, not understanding. He leaned back, resting his forearms on his knees. Before my fiancée left me, I used to believe people deserved better, that doing the right thing mattered, even when no one saw it. Then she rode off with a man who had more money and more land, and every good part of me felt like it died. The girl's gaze didn't soften, not quite, but she listened. When I saw you on that platform, he said, I remembered what it felt like to be treated like something replaceable, something bought and discarded. And I couldn't leave you there, not to men who'd break your spirit, because they couldn't understand it. Asterisk, the silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was delicate, like the fragile beginning of something neither of them wanted to name. Asterisk, she looked at the table, her fingers gripping each other. I'm not angry you pulled me from the auction. I'm angry the world gave you that choice. Asterisk, Caleb nodded. He understood. Asterisk, after a long moment, she stood. Her bare feet made no sound on the wooden floor as she crossed to the small shelf near the door. There, framed in tarnished metal, sat a tintype photograph, Caleb's late father, his mother, and a boy who still carried hope in his eyes. Asterisk, the girl lifted it gently, studying it the way someone might study a map of a land they've never crossed. Asterisk, you lost them young? She asked. Asterisk, he swallowed. Father died in a cattle accident. Mother followed 2 winters later. She placed the photograph back with reverence. You know what it's like then, she said softly, to be left alone because life decides it for you. Asterisk, her words weren't an accusation or a challenge. They were a rare offering of shared truth. Asterisk, she turned back to him. My name is Ayana. Asterisk, he felt his chest loosen. Until now she hadn't given him that, not her name. Not even the possibility of it. Asterisk, Ayana, he repeated carefully. Asterisk, her expression didn't change, but her eyes warmed just barely. Asterisk, that name, it means eternal blossom, she said. But there's nothing eternal about what's coming tomorrow. Asterisk, Caleb stood, stepping closer. You don't have to face it alone. Asterisk, her breath caught, eyes lifting to meet his. The lantern light shimmered across her face, catching the traces of pride, fear, and something almost like hope that she tried to hide. Asterisk, I can't ask you to fight a battle that isn't yours, she whispered. Asterisk, you didn't ask. Asterisk, she looked down, fingers twisting into the hem of her dress, finally showing the fear she'd tried so hard to bury. Asterisk, if I walk out there at dawn, she said, they might accept me, or they might decide I was tainted by being taken, or by staying here. Asterisk, and if you don't go. She looked out the window where the plains stretched in moonlit silence. Then they come for me, and for you, and neither of us walks away. Asterisk. Caleb stepped closer, close enough that the quiet between them shifted into something human, something fragile. Asterisk. Ayana, he said gently, what do you want? Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with the weight of a lifetime of choices made for her. She whispered, I want a place where I belong. The words struck him harder than any threat the warriors had cast in the wind. And in that moment, just a heartbeat, the world stopped between them. Two people alone against the judgment of nations, the prejudice of neighbors, the scars of their histories. Ayana looked toward the window again. They'll expect my answer at sunrise. She turned back, toward him. We faced dawn together, or not at all. Dawn didn't arrive gently. Asterisk. It came in thin, cold stripes over the horizon. Light cut through the last of the night like a blade, slicing the land into gold and shadow. The air smelled of frost and sage. Even the birds waited, as if the land itself knew the morning held judgment. Asterisk. Ayana stood outside Caleb's house long before the sun rose. Asterisk. Barefoot again, chin lifted, back straight. Asterisk. Caleb watched her from the doorway, the coffee in his hands turning lukewarm. He had seen brave faces before during cattle stampedes, funerals, near misses with men who'd drunk too much courage from a bottle, but nothing like hers. There was no bravado, no performance, just a girl deciding whether her life ended or began at sunrise. You don't have to go alone, he said quietly. Asterisk. Ayana didn't turn. You already stand with me. That's enough. Asterisk. He stepped down onto the dirt, boots crunching softly. She didn't step back when he came beside her. The distance between them had become smaller, a space filled with unspoken truths. Asterisk. Far across the plains, silhouettes began to form, a slow procession, a gathering of mounted warriors, still and silent, their shapes growing clearer as the sun climbed. Caleb's breath tightened. Ayana whispered, they came early. Asterisk. The riders stopped 100 yards out. They didn't shout, didn't draw weapons. They simply watched, waiting for her decision. Asterisk. Her hands shook once before she steadied them at her sides. Caleb noticed. You're allowed to be afraid, he said. Asterisk. I'm not afraid of them, she murmured. I'm afraid of choosing wrong. Asterisk. He turned toward her. There is no wrong choice when the world gave you none. Her eyes softened. Then the elder, the same man from last night, rode forward alone. His horse stopped at a respectful distance. His lined face was unreadable, but his posture said everything. He expected her answer now. Ayana stepped forward. Caleb walked beside her. Asterisk. The elder's gaze shifted to Caleb, lingering not with hatred but with warning, as if measuring the man who had changed the path of one girl's fate. Asterisk. Ayana spoke first in her language, words smooth but trembling. Asterisk. Caleb didn't understand, but her voice carried 1,000 untold stories. The elder listened without interruption. When she finished, he responded quieter this time, almost gentle. His eyes lowered as he spoke, like delivering a verdict he didn't want to give. Ayana's shoulders stiffened. Caleb touched her elbow. What's he saying? Asterisk. She swallowed. He asked me if I was staying with you. Caleb hesitated, but only for a breath. Then tell him the truth. Asterisk. Ayana looked at him, truly looked, as if searching his face for a sign she wasn't imagining the fragile thread pulling them together. Her voice, when she turned back to the elder, was steadier. The elder listened, then looked at Caleb again. His eyes softened on acceptance, not approval, but something like reluctant respect for a man who took a risk he didn't need to take. He spoke 3 final words. Ayana's breath left her chest in a quiet gasp. Asterisk. Caleb almost stepped forward. What did he say? Asterisk. She whispered. Barely audible, he said. Then let her live. Asterisk. The elder leaned forward, pressed his hand briefly to Ayana's shoulder, then turned his horse. The other riders parted silently as he passed through. No war cries, no anger, no blood promised, just a quiet retreat into the rising light. Ayana stood frozen, watching them fade into the horizon until they became specks of dust, swallowed by the land. Caleb waited. When she finally turned toward him, her eyes shone not with tears, but with a weight lifting off her shoulders she never expected to shed. Asterisk. They won't return, she said. They won't hunt. They won't punish. Asterisk. Caleb's chest eased for the first time since the auction. Then you're safe. Asterisk. She shook her head softly. Not safe. free. Asterisk. They walked back toward the house, the sunlight warming the frost beneath their feet. The ranch looked different in the morning, less lonely, more like the beginning of something. Asterisk. On the porch, she hesitated. Asterisk. I don't know what happens now, she said. Asterisk. Caleb removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. Neither do I. Asterisk. She gave him a small, fragile smile. Good, then we start the same. Asterisk. He chuckled under his breath. Do you want to stay here, on the ranch? Asterisk. Ayana looked out over the plains, the horses grazing, the light shimmering over miles of quiet land, the small house that suddenly didn't feel like a place she was trapped in. Asterisk. I want a place where I belong, she said again. But this time she added, maybe I can build it here, if you'll let me. Caleb's voice came low, steady as sunrise. You don't need my permission, just my company. Asterisk. She turned toward him. No fear, no walls, just a girl with a future no longer stolen. Asterisk. The plains stretched wide behind them, and the day began soft and new. Asterisk. Years later, people in the nearby towns would tell the story differently. Some said the cowboy saved the girl. Some said the girl saved the cowboy. Some said they saved each other. Asterisk. But only the wind, the land, and the rising sun knew the truth. Two broken lives didn't collide by accident. They chose each other in a world that demanded separation. Asterisk. And that choice changed everything.